in jihadi organisation.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe for free.
My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy Podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security, and armed governmental personal protection operations, but also majors in on the world of geopolitics, a world which I inhabited for 30 years of my life. And so what I want to do, and what I do is I bring guests on who have worked in the field of secret intelligence, national security, personal protection, or areas that are connected to that, as well as individuals that have nothing to do with these areas, but either have an interest in those areas or just by what they do sometimes are connected to it. And to be fair, on occasions, they're not even connected. It's just that geopolitics is all around us. So we can get the feel from that. Well, today is one of these individuals whom is connected to the game that I used to be in some way or another. And I've been able to entice him onto the show. So I want to get a feel for him. So let me introduce you to him right now. It's Wayne Okell MBE. And I just want Wayne to tell us about himself. Hello, Wayne. How are you?
Hi, Calvin. Yeah, very well, thank you.
Great, my friend. Well, I can hear from the accent, fellow Northerner, which is great. We shouldn't say the best people, but that's what you do, isn't it? So yeah, Wayne, listen, mate, let the listeners hear about you. Tell us a little bit about what you do now, and then we'll go into the interesting bits about how you got there.
Sure. So I'm the Director of Talent and Performance at a charity called Fairways. We've got residential children's homes, crisis intervention centres, family centres, a foster care side of the business. We're a very diverse organisation, and a real spectrum of being able to pick a child up in trauma and put them into that step down pathway, you know, to kind of grow over the years and develop independence to be able to be okay and just function well in the world like any other adult human being.
That's super. And I know that in doing that, you somehow fed into the world of special forces in the United Kingdom. So now, obviously, you may not be able to speak about those areas, and on the show we are very cognizant of that, of course, because of what we've done in the past. But if you can give us a flavour of how that fed into, because obviously there's take the boy and I'll show you the man type of system.
Yeah.
But how that fed into you being in that world as well, which is more akin to mine.
So I spent some time in the military. I was in the Navy actually for 30 years. I was a PT instructor. Started as an engineer, and I remember my first division officer saying to me, "I'm possibly the worst engineer that the Marines ever had," and it was something I just couldn't connect with. You know, that was a job for me that I loved everything outside of engineering. So I love the sport, I love the way of life, I love the camaraderie. I loved, you know, the everything apart from my day job. And then thankfully I was going down a path of, I think I'd been in trouble actually a number of times in the first few years, and I was going down a path.
Where you can't say I've been in trouble and not expand on it.
So, you know, I was. If you work out, you know, you mentioned I was a northerner. I'm from a coal mining town in the northwest of England called Leigh, and growing up in Leigh, do you know what, Carlton? I've thought about this a lot, especially in the day job I'm in now. You know, when you think about like your attachment patterns, you know, as a as a youngster growing up, and you know, like your parents, your family, the people that support you. And there's a number of things that kind of happened to me along the way. So I think with all my friends, I'm kind of I wasn't the biggest out of all my friends. So I was always kind of ducking and diving just to keep myself in a good place, really, or just protect myself more than anything. But if you guys, you know, are unaware of this, growing up in the 70s and 80s in Leigh, it was a great community, but it's a coal mining town, so it's a pretty rough and ready kind of community in those days. And one of the things that I am now really, really highly aware of is the fact that there was a lot of violence, you know, that was kind of around me as a child growing up. I mean, my dad had a very traumatic upbringing, you know, with being abused, you know, by his father, you know, physically abused in terms of, you know, just raising his hand to him and yeah, leaving him in not some good places. So one of the strong influences on me was my dad, who was a very strong and resilient character, but was also successful as well. But it was a real workaholic, and he didn't really do a lot of emotion sort of things. So you know, you can kind of see the path that I'm on. You know, that I loved a sport and still do. I'm so passionate about the game of rugby league. I just love rugby league. I love training. I love preparing to play rugby league. Still do now. I'm 56 now, and I still, you know, I devote hours and hours each week just to keep myself in good shape, just in case I ever need to pull my boots on again. Which hopefully, you know, I don't, other than playing rugby league masters. But yeah, I guess the whole landscape and environment around Leigh at the time was, you know, a lot of people just seemed to be violent to each other. And growing up, you know, kids were always, you're in scrapes, you know, and there was stuff that used to happen on the streets that I actually thought to myself, I got to like sort of 17, 18, I had a good job. Something my dad couldn't really get his head around was me wanting to leave that job, you know, about to become an engineer. Not a very good one, again, may I add. And then suddenly I was delivering a report in Manchester, and it was raining, and I stood in the doorway of just some random building, and there was a guy in there with a white shirt on, black trousers, smoking a pipe, and he kind of said to me, "Can I help you?" And I was like, no, I'm okay, I'm just sheltering from the rain. And what I didn't realise, it was the Royal Navy, Royal Marines, Armed Forces Careers Office. Yeah. And within the space of 20 minutes, I'd literally I joined the Navy. But I joined the Navy, that was in January, and literally I was in on the 1st of April, you know, so it was accelerated, it was so fast. Yeah. And then I love the Navy, I love the services. I was a bit gutted that they didn't play rugby league at that stage, but actually they do now, and very well, may I add. But there was opportunities. I loved rugby union, boxing, training in general, anything that involved physical activity. And I was like a moth to a light. I just drifted across to anything that kind of looked like that. And then went on to participate in the field gun competition the Navy used to have at Earl's Court, which was phenomenal. That was such an influence on me. Did 30 years. Towards the end of my career, I started to rub shoulders and get involved with as you say, the Special Forces element of the military. Wasn't in the Special Forces in any way, shape or form, but it was all around looking at some of the aspects of things like high-speed boat transfers, some of the work, the psychological effects and physiological effects to some of our operators on long, you know, high-speed journeys into, let's say,
into operations. Let's just
yeah, without going too deep.
Yeah.
And then I just reached a stage where, when I look back on it, I think I've always been involved in kind of work or jobs or activities or bits of life that involves either controlled or uncontrolled violence at times. But the control bit, you know, that was my day job. You know, from growing up in Leigh, suddenly I find myself, you know, in that whole process around. That's what I do for a job, you know, delivering controlled violence 24/7 to enemies of the Queen, you know, and helping support that through training efforts. If I wasn't frontline, I was always working towards something which would develop like that moral component, you know, that robustfulness, that resilience, and everything else. And when I reflect back on that now, I think upsetting a lot of people along the way doing it as well at times, because I love learning and I love education. I love educating myself, and I'm always thinking about what's next. And even that, you know, I used to like surround myself with blokes and some really good girls and pose ideas for innovative, you know, for innovation and stuff like this, to be able to then go, yeah, we're doing this, but how can we do it better? How can we improve? So
Can I pick up on that angle?
Yeah, certainly.
Because I've experienced that myself, and it doesn't necessarily put you in a good place. So I'll say what I've put in my book. So because then I know that it's been authorized. So but I'll expand so you can see where I'm at, and I'm guessing there's going to be synergies between you and I on this. So when I was in the Secret Intelligence Service as a case officer, one of the things that I worked on was how to, and I won't explain how, but how to obtain agents, because obtaining agents is everything in the secret services, particularly, well, in all services, be it national security or the Secret Intelligence Services. You know, be that special branch, MI5, or security service, real name, or the Secret Intelligence Service, MI6. So agents is everything. So I worked out a scheme whereby we could obtain agents quite easily at a fraction of what would normally be the cost of chasing people around the world. Now, you'd think that would be looked at positively. And to be fair, in SIS, and it was, and the chief of the service, who we call C, was very, very keen on it. However, the other service, who they work very closely with on the internal body, which is the security service, MI5, hated the idea because they thought it took away from them something, because I was running it partially internal. So what happens is when you're creating things, you're stepping on people's toes. So that was that. So then later, I'm back into my full sister organisation or parent organisation. After several years in SIS, I was back into Special Branch. And I created then, in the protection side of Special Branch, because that's just happened where I happened to be after a few years, because you move around in the branch. Some stupid person came up with the idea that the branch should be no longer, you know, an organisation that started in 1883 was the only national security and secret intelligence organisation in the UK when it was formed in Scotland Yard, and then worked through always in the national security aspect all the way through till 2006. But somebody said we need to disband it, you know, and again that was down to jealousy, by the way. So it was disbanded, and where you happened to be when the music stopped playing, because in the branch you'd move around every 3 years to a different section of the branch, and I was actually ready to move to either the liaison role externally in either Germany or in the Netherlands, the languages that I speak well, or in the role which we just called the basically the unit that looks at arresting spies and dealing with spies, be it in the military or anywhere else, which we call prosecution. So I was either going to be head of that or head of that of a section. So because I was where I was when the music stopped, and some of these roles were being lost, you stayed where you were. So they wanted to form a new body, and I have to explain this. This is why I'm saying it, which was called SO1 Specialist Protection. So it would do the protection role that the branch did, but it would do that in isolation. Big mistake, because you're missing out all of the secret intelligence stuff you do whilst you were doing that within the branch. You're missing that. And you're missing out actually the knowledge of intelligence. So let's say you're getting a guy, let's say he's the president of somewhere, or the foreign secretary of somewhere, coming to Britain, then actually, as a branch officer, you understood what the political ramifications were of that movement. Yeah. Because you studied it within the branch. And if you then went externally to another country, let's say you go into, I don't know, Yemen, you understood when you're taking that extremely senior British minister to the Yemen, you understood also what they were capable of, be it terrorists, be it subversives, be it others who might wish to undermine our senior politician. You understood how that would work. So when you take that away and just put it in isolation, you basically end up just bodyguarding. Yeah. And therefore, I was trying to prevent that aimless bodyguarding. So I created two, again, within that, two bodies. One was a body that was high threat, low infrastructure work, where we were extremely well armed, extremely well trained, had an understanding of intelligence, because I knew that would be lost in times to come. Good first aid, etc., etc., etc. And obviously we work with various people who you might work with in order to bring that about. So we had that capacity within ourselves. And again, that was looked upon poorly. And then I created another unit also, that because at the time I knew we were going through, because when I was in Secret Intelligence Service, I was chasing around the world people who were happy to blow themselves up and finance people who would blow themselves up in various terrorist organisations. So I knew that this was coming to the United Kingdom. This is before 7/7. And so I was able to create and put in place a unit which could covertly look at protection, because you've got the overt aspect of protection. Everybody knows who they are, guys standing there with earpieces in. But, I wanted to create a covert element that nobody would know of. And so I was able to do that. You will not believe, you really will not believe the pressures that I took for creating something aimed at saving people's lives. Mm. I mean, I had a chief superintendent who, outranks me, obviously, but is not in my game, so doesn't understand, saying, you're changing things around. This must be the preserve of our people in uniform to do this. Uniform firearms officers can sort all this out, not thinking that the whole covert aspect is what's important, and also how you communicate that, and obviously understanding intelligence and how you work that, and understanding who the bodies might be. No, but I was just stepping on his toes. Yeah. And this fella said, if we weren't here, I'd take you outside. And I said to him, don't let that stop you, my friend. Come on, let's go outside. And I noticed he wasn't so happy to do that subsequently. But anyway, you know what I mean? Because it is this. So I just want to know from you, and if you could go into detail like I have, that would be great. Yeah. How that jealousy in some ways, or just lack of understanding, has come about when you're trying to change things. Yeah, so I would imagine the military is massively problematic for that.
Yeah, huge. Try and give you a good example of that. We've always prepared people physically for the operations, I guess, the sharp end of what we do, in a certain way. And I came up with a different way of doing it. And at the time, without going into too much detail, the Second Sea Lord had agreed to take on the same annual fitness test as the Army and the RAF, and I was kind of saying, look, it's a mistake. Let's create a fitness test. And I was speaking to my director at the time to just say, let's create a fitness test that actually captures what we do operationally. So actually, it's preparing us for it, in a roundabout way. So it's very accurate. What I recognise from what you've just explained, Carlton, what I recognise about myself as well is I've always been an agent of change. Always questioning and always being, sometimes my questioning, I'll be quite critical about stuff, and it'll put me as a bit of an out voice, if you understand what I'm saying.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
So outside of the group. And then the difficulty then is you then fight hard to then get back in the group, and stay in the group. But nevertheless, I believe I'm quite a strong and resilient character, so I'm okay with being outside the group, more often than not. And I think what it's made me do, it's made me really work hard to know my stuff, to be I think that's the reason I never transferred to the officer cadre, because I wanted to be a subject matter expert in my field, to affect operations, from with deep purpose and deep meaning, rather than going to a job where I'd just be another kind of generalist officer. And I never used to check my monthly salary. I'd never checked my payslip. I didn't care what I earned, when I was serving. I just loved the job that much. I was connected to it, deep purpose, passion, meaning, everything surrounded what I was doing. And I think that's one of the reasons why I didn't mind, causing a bit of chaos from time to time. And anyway, I ended up meeting Second Sea Lord and with the director and giving him a compelling reason for change, and saying, this could be a fantastic vision for the future, if you just hear us out on it. And then also suggesting that, this could be great in terms of his legacy moving forwards. But what it meant was training the Navy, and albeit it had an impact on the Royal Marine Corps as well, and I'll come to that in a second, but training the Navy in a completely different way they've been trained before. So the Navy was full of, the kind of black vinyl and chrome plated machines, that you used to, you get on, you do like a pec deck, machine as an example, or an adductor or an abductor machine, that cost thousands and thousands. But actually it doesn't, it's not a human movement pattern, that's required on a daily basis. When do you perform, those kind of movements? You don't. So I was talking about saving them.
So you're saying that because you don't, when it comes to the time when you need it, you don't have the capacity. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Exactly that, Carl. I'm saying that when you come to operations at the sharp end, that you're not adaptable and you've not got that range of movement, because you've just, you've sat in a machine and trained for maybe weeks and months on end as part of your fitness regime and preparation program. But actually, so let's talk about the sharp end of business, the tier 1 and tier 2 guys. They're tactical athletes. So we should be preparing them that way. So one of the things I did when I got involved with the SF guys when I'd left, actually, and without going into too much detail, there were some frontline frogmen that basically we just tested the range of movement through a series of different movements, like the squat, for example. And we had guys that had picked up injuries over the years, and we asked them to come to a PT session that we were going to take with the weapons. So they're in, can you imagine they're all in like CrossFit shorts and t-shirts, and then with a weapon in the hand. And then we said, just get down into a deep squat position, with your hips below your knees, and just your chest up, and just cradle your weapon across your arms. And of course, over 50% of them couldn't do that because
this is sort of SBS.
Yeah, they've trained in a certain way, and that way doesn't.
And did you explain to them why they need that capacity?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So they weren't saying, well, we will never need to do that anyway.
Yeah.
They knew why they'd need to do it, but they've just never been dragged through it as such.
Yeah, and what we did is we used all different kind of firing, positions to be able to do this. So from being on one knee to then suddenly, being able to do a full arc and turn your weapon and rotate yourself so your signature doesn't change. The height of where you're at doesn't change.
Got it. Yeah.
All you're doing is you're going through like a hip flow movement to go from one knee, turning up, 180 degrees to the other knee, and shifting your weapon from maybe one shoulder to the other shoulder. All this kind of stuff, and it was really interesting. And when we did some work with the kind of tier 2 divers and the IED experts, there's really interesting things like we stripped them off to the speedos and just basically took some images and we wanted, we were interested in anatomically what they presented like. So then suddenly it was like they all had this. You can imagine if you could draw a line down the middle of the body from standing, like we did it with a red line on an image on a photograph. And what we found with a lot of them was they all had a hip sway so that the left hips were rotated. So the line would actually, rather than cutting through the center of, their forehead and nose and chin, down through their chest and abdomen to the floor, where there's an even spread between the feet. Mm-hmm. What we found was happening was it was kind of going somewhere around the left-hand side of the head, the left eye, through the left pectoral, down. And it was really interesting. So then we were suddenly then going, well, why is there like 70% of the tier 2 ID experts presenting with like this kind of off center line kind of presentation? And then when you then go, well, how are they preparing? And we're loading them up with a lot of weight, with weapons, with, a variety of different things. They're running extended distances, carrying load, they're in the water doing this stuff. They're boarding vessels, because a 60-foot ladder climb is a horrendous, bit of strength work. And we were getting peelers, people were peeling off the top of the, a steel wire ladder at the very top, and that is not a nice thing to do. Is fall 60 foot, and plant
into water, which you like.
Yeah. You're talking about ending someone's career, if you're not careful.
Yeah.
So we were working on like this whole capability around stuff like this, and of course, just doing that with the wider Navy. Suddenly we were going, no machines. We want you to train with your feet on the ground, lift, press, pull, squat, rotation, locomotion, and gait. These kind of movements, and then making the kind of fitness regimes really simple and really easy around this. But the biggest issue was not the people. We found a lot of people were very hungry because they made instant changes, instant adaptations. So they were going, oh, I feel a bit better, I can I don't have as much pain in my hips, because I'm standing, I'm sat in flex positions all day, for a lot of our guys and girls. But the biggest kind of resistance came from a lot of the PTs, because we were actually challenging their expertise. And there was a lot of them, especially at senior level, dare I say this, that weren't current, that had stepped away from being exercise specialists and knowing their stuff at a deep level. And I recognise now it's just all change, So when you change anything, sometimes people they'll get angry, they'll get frustrated, they will deny the change. Where I had one very senior guy saying to me, well, I'm just going to continue as normal.
Yeah.
I said, but you can't, because this is the new normal. And I think I've always been mindful of like kind of futuristic planning, and even we'll get to a point and we'll go, and we've got a new process and we've embedded it and it's working and it's showing great results. And I know that people I'm with, if I've not worked with them before, because my next question is, how do we improve it?
Yeah. Now, you see, the thing is this. There's a guy called Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, the turn of the century, an American guy. You won't know him. Basically, he created or stated a phrase which he called the talented 10. Yeah. And it was in relationship to something else. It was in relationship to Black Americans at the stage. Because obviously coming out of slavery and then into trying to obtain citizenship, particularly in the South, where it was denied. So what he was saying was basically that 10% of the people, right, will make it through no matter what you do. It's the 90% that need assistance. And that is regardless of whom you are, what colour you are, what status you are, whatever. Right. So that's what your statement was. The talented 10 will make it. Mm. I'm putting to you, and I do believe that, and I'm putting to you that you are part of the talented 10, because I'll ask you this question. How many non-commissioned officers, I'm taking you that you're a non-commissioned officer at the time, have the capacity to get their idea to the second Sea Lord?
Actually, that's a very good point. That's really made me think that. And I can also tell you that growing up in Lee allowed me to do that. And I'll tell you the reason why. I got told at the time, you won't get in front of the second Sea Lord. His diary's, chocker for 6 months. There's no way you're going to get an audience. I was like, right, okay. And I've faced this so many times, it's one of the reasons I went out and decided that I was going to absolutely start rugby league in the Navy and go full force in it and I did for 15 years simply because somebody told me I couldn't, and just underestimate you as a character. So the first thing I did was I went down to the second Sea Lord's residence, which is, in the dockyard, and just hung around outside, and I know him as well. He knows me by name. So hung around outside at various times of the day, and I probably did this for about 2 weeks.
Brilliant.
And then actually got he's got a Royal Marine Corporal who was his driver. And then I thought to myself, I'd seen him a number of times, and I said, have you got any fitness equipment and he went, yeah, we have. I said, oh, can I have a look at it? And so we had a look through it, and I said, like, there's a few items here that just past the sell by date. Look, how do you get these renewed? Who do you renew them by? I can help you with that. By the way, when's the second Sea Lord going to be around? And anyway, so we hatched this plan, and then he literally stepped out of his front door early one morning after about 3 weeks, and then kind of went, oh, Mr. Okell, so I saluted him and went, morning, sir. What are you doing around this time? And I said, actually, while you're here. And that's when I first got that idea to him. And then the next minute, the director went, oh, my God, the second Sea Lord's been in touch.
Yeah.
We've got an audience,
Love it. Right?
Yeah.
This is exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, there's ways to do it, isn't there?
Absolutely, because that would not have got done. Your average guy, and I knew you were the talented 10. The average guy, the 90%, he comes up with ideas, or she comes up with ideas. Of course they do.
Yeah.
Right? But it's trying or creating or obtaining the opportunity to put that further, right? Because you can have all the ideas you want in the world, but if you've not got that drive, that capacity, that working through adversity, that you've learned, that you put into yourself. Now, even if you work for adversity, it might not be you. Yeah. But, once you've got that, and by the way, one should understand with the talented 10, it's not that they are going to be the richest person in the world. It's not that they're going to be the nicest person in the world. You could be the talented 10 and be, frankly, one of the best killers in the world. I'll give you an example. Pablo Escobar. Okay, so I working against Pablo Escobar at one stage because of narco-terrorism. Now, that guy was clearly a member of the talented 10. Absolutely. Now, he didn't use it for the positive, if you will. He probably used it, well, positive to him because he became a multi-billionaire. But he was happy to kill people to do it as well. So what I'm saying to you is, it doesn't mean that it's going to be always positive, but it just means you have that certain something. And it's going to get you connected to the people because they're going to see it. It's going to frighten a lot of people. But the man at the very top who isn't really that worried about his post because he's already there, the woman at the top who isn't really bothered about her post because she's already there, they may see something that they think, this guy can help me. Yeah, can help obtain my way forward.
My synapses have literally lit up as you're talking with stuff that I've kind of done in the last sort of few years, and one of them was I left the service to. I kind of thought I've done everything I need to do. I got offered a brilliant role, and then I just decided that I was almost becoming desensitized to the job, and I love risk, so I wanted to go out and experience a bit of what if this happens, what if that happens, what's coming next, what do I do if. And I left and I worked for a private company and did a lot of work in kind of developing Well, my role actually was heading up a platform, a brand new platform, and it was, when we want you to go out and we want to be the desired kind of partner and brand of UK Special Forces Tier 1 and Tier 2, and anybody else you can drag along, within that kind of fraternity. Mm-hmm. So very quickly, I looked at all the kind of equipment and stuff that we'd already got, and then started to think to myself, this is not even going to get close, because a lot of the stuff we've got doesn't even service the need. So it's understanding what the requirement is from an SF perspective, or even elite police forces, and then also you're then going, all your CTSFOs, the fire brigades, for instance, because it kind of all fits together, the kind of emergency services, fraternity as well.
Yeah.
So I went along. I looked at our catalogue of stuff, and I was like, none of this is any good. There was one item actually, but none of the rest of it was pretty dire, to be honest, and missing we were firing wide of the mark. So I decided to, let's go and do a bit of research, and I went out, and the MOD were holding like a kind of a trade show at the Imperial War Museum in London. And I got a ticket for myself and a guy I worked very closely with, who's a movement expert, who is a phenomenal character. His name's Dan Cleal. He thinks and reasons above the rest. He's just a phenomenal individual. And we went along to this MOD session, and I just remember there was all sorts of people were talking about various items of equipment and everything else, with the MOD, and it was this opportunity where the MOD were opening the door to say, this is what we require out to you guys, in the UK. Can you provide
it?
Yeah. And there was the head of, I think she had a title like the head of human performance or something like that, and there was one line that stuck with me, and she said, the Ministry of Defence will look at any equipment or facilities that is of a multiple modality nature.
Yeah.
I.e., it does more than one thing.
Correct.
Because that, that's, if it does more than one thing, that it saves a lot of money. So I thought about this, and I was on the train coming back down to Portsmouth, and then suddenly I was then thinking, right, let's move from selling equipment to selling facilities. So, in that environment, at that level, what do they need? And then I was then thinking around fast roping, and I knew that we've got a fast rope gantry at Bryce Norton, but we had loads of fast rope gantries that were kind of, very much DIY, made locally, by operators, and a lot of them were closed down at the time, by the health and safety executive on the various bases, because they weren't safe. So then I thought, okay, fast rope gantry, let's have a look at that, and how can we make that as effective and as real life as possible without putting a bird in the air, so there's that saving on fuel and cost and all this, and you can do it as many times as you like if you've got a gantry. Being able to abseil from height, like out the door of a helo, that kind of thing. Being able to shoot, and this is all within the same facility.
Yeah.
So it may not be ballistic, full ballistic rounds, but nevertheless, airsoft, pellet, etc., paint. I've then looked at method of entry in terms of that really sent me on a journey, actually, starting with your normal kind of mechanical prying, so you get yourself in through a door, but then at the same time then developing the, because there's all different ways of of getting in and out of places.
Absolutely.
Doors, windows, etc. So the mechanical elements of that. Then shotgun entry, then using laser cutting and lances, then explosives. And that was one I was sat with a team of guys in West Yorkshire, and we were just looking at the different charges to, blow through a wall, blow through, C charges and push charges to get in and out of doors and stuff like this, through windows. And anyway, and then one of the things that really set me off was I went to Portugal, and I was I put a proposal together for the GNR and the GOE. You know, they're kind of elite police forces.
Yeah, familiar.
Yeah, and I was looking there at like an open top ballistic shoot house, and then the conversation started to go wider around the urban environment. You know, the tactical urban environment, urban climbing. You know, how do like the Bataclan, for instance, you know, the French elite, how do they get from the ground floor, you know, up to the top, and just not having that capability and competence. So then I started to think about that as well. So then built this facility, this idea in my mind around if we had different doors, different balconies, different windows, you know, we could climb from balcony to balcony, window to door, window to window, you know, stuff like this. And then even thought about putting a lift shaft in there. So, you know, you could without any, you know, the most basic of kit, using like just prusik knots, you know, and climb 3, 4, 5 stories of a lift shaft just on the steel wire cables and stuff. And then literally went to without going into too much detail, went to a place in central London, sat down with the colonel, and we started this conversation. And he was like, "Can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do the other?" And literally I said, "Yeah, we can." Carlton, the truth of the matter, if I'm being honest, is no, we couldn't. We'd never built anything like that before. But I said to him, "I'm going on holiday for the next 2 weeks." I said, "Can you give me 4 weeks and I'll turn a proposal around for you?" Which he said, "Yeah, of course, that'd be fantastic." And literally spent 4 weeks out of the field learning everything you needed to learn about. I mean, I was urban climbing in London, you know, with this technical expert from the fire brigade. I was with a really good friend of mine doing some IED work, you know, and looking at the variety of different charges and what that would mean for, you know, being able to use that in close quarters in a training facility. And we built our first one, and of course we got off and running. But from there, I met this one guy that was just phenomenal, and his name's Rob Taylor, and he owns a company called 4GD, Fourth Generation Development, and we started to really explore ideas because with some of the SF guys I was speaking to, I was speaking a language that I love neuroscience, and I was speaking a language that I think was missing from their environment too much at the time, and it was around how your nervous system works, and you know how your autonomic nervous system works, your sympathetic versus parasympathetic, and linked, you know, all the physical aspects of, you know, being able to look after yourself and everything else to this. And the same time about like from a training perspective, every time if you've got like, let's say, you know, your training environment, your training facility, if you step through the door at the front and every time it's a right hand out swinging door, guess what? You're going to get used to that. Your brain's going to accommodate that. Muscle memory. Yeah. So I was all about like changing the stimulus. And then I was talking about blended and immersive training. And that was one when they were like, "What do you mean?" So even to the point where Rob and I, you know, I used to go up to central London, and Rob and I would do loads of stuff around VR, AI, you know, like how can we have a training facility that's got a gantry on the top of it, that's got cameras everywhere, that you know, the guy's going to be in charge of it, can change the stimulus and operations as you go, and then you can then bring things in like for instance, you know, we're sensory beings, so you know, everything we do involves our senses primarily. You know, your most lead senses is your eyes, you know, vision, so through your retina and whatnot. So depriving somebody of that, like in a dark environment, you know, and getting used to operating in dark environments, and then at the same time then putting things like sensors, beams, alarms, so you can have an auditory alarm in there. You could have things like a proximity sensor, so that you could, as you got closer, you cut a beam, and as you got closer to the room you were going to, you know, bust into, that everything started to get louder as you were getting closer. So
that's the real world, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it supercharges your nervous system, you know. So your sympathetic nervous system, by the time you get to the door, you're like, whoa, you know. And then you can also have like these kind of alarms and trips and everything else that fire stuff in like a jet of air, water, there's an explosion, but it actually feels real in there, so it becomes really immersive. There's a lot of water underfoot, this kind of stuff. Compartments that fill up and stuff with water, and
so let me get this right then, though.
Yeah.
Wayne, are you saying that they didn't have that capacity already?
To a degree, so they've got like loads of different training modalities. But what I'm talking about is one that you can do, one modality, one unit that you can almost do everything in. You can change the game from moment to moment in there, and you can change the state, constantly varied, constantly changing stimulus.
I'm with you. Yeah. So you would build this on behalf of the MOD.
Yeah.
But it would be outsourced privately, effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly.
I'm with you now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's interesting because and again, what's interesting is you're absolutely right. Muscle memory is very, very important. I'll give you two very quick ones. One was there was and this is an American one, which we had on our training all the time, which was a shootout in the States.
Yeah.
I think it was in New York, and basically, general police good at the shootout, and the training was when they do the 6 monthly shoot, which is dead simple, by the way, for your average police officer. It's a target that doesn't move, and you just put rounds in it, and then you classify. So, and then what you do is it was old days, so you take your revolver, you'd empty the rounds out, and you put the metals in the bin, because they realised that the metals of the casing saved money, right? Yeah. So they'd send that off, and obviously it'd be smelted down, and New York City would make some money. NYPD would make money. Bang, gone. So they get into this shootout, and this officer expends his 6 rounds. This is how old it is. Boom, boom, boom. So what he then does is I'm laughing, but it's not funny. He ejects his spent cartridges into his hand. Yeah. Yeah. As he would do and he then put his hand out and put his hand over to put it into the bin, which would be next to him on the range. Yeah. And he got shot in the head. Right? Because his muscle memory was, that's what happens. And under stress, as you know, you work to muscle memory. Yeah. Yeah. So boom, boom, bang, boom, shot in the head, finished. So that was getting away from muscle memory. The other one that I can remember and recall, and I then changed it subsequently, where we never got these people. There's a thing called the government car service. And the government car service, what it basically does is it's just drivers. They're not trained in any way, shape or means for anything. And they drive around, generally ministers. So you could get to minister level in government, and there are many of them. I'm not talking about Secretary of State. That's even higher. And then some Secretary of State obviously receive protection from us. Few and far between, but they do. And then that would be a special branch, or as it is now, an SO1 driver. But before, there were all these what they call government car service drivers, old men, old women, whatever, just driving these cars around, and all they were doing is just chauffeuring. So it was designed, said, let's bring these onto the range. Let's bring them into the scenarios that we're working with in protection and see how they function. Because some of them were still driving the vehicles that we were protecting the individuals in. So obviously we got one of our guys in the vehicle, and then we got a backup car behind it, or whatever, or two, whatever it might be. It's immaterial. So you then drive along, the government car service fellow or woman would just drive along. And of course, everything was set up for an ambush, which we're kind of used to. Yeah. So I'll never forget this. This is like the 80s, I don't know, the 80s and 90s. And this is why I vowed I would change it when I got some rank. I was a DC then. And we're driving down, and boom, explosion goes off. It's a big explosion, no doubt about it. Next minute, rounds are coming. This woman who was driving, government car service driver, stops, just starts screaming. Ah! Stop screaming and stop the vehicle, put the brakes on, boom, like that, and didn't move. So obviously I had to chuck her out of the vehicle. But the point is that that's reality, and that was never been trained. Yeah. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah, so absolutely. Their reaction, like what you're saying, was scream, shout. And unless you put them through the stresses you're talking about, you're never going to know what that reaction will be. Well, go on. Sorry, go on. I'm just going to say, so that's why I find your training, incredible, because you can put them through a whole loads of different scenarios. So even operators who are used to scenarios, if you then put them through different scenarios, it changes that up. Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying. And you're training for not just the known, but you're also training for the unknown.
and constantly changing the parameters of the training stimulus. So I'll try and give you a good example of doing that in the job I'm in now, because I've gone from delivering controlled violence to the complete opposite. It's delivering care and compassion and empathy, and it's a real step change in the job I do now. And I'm responsible for all the learning and development of 400 people that do a fantastic job to look after kids that have and families that have experienced the worst trauma ever. And I run a Future Leaders program. It's a 10-month program, and I've got like a strap line for the program, which is, if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you. And my kind of CEO and MD I love the fact they're so invested in the program, but they're also really invested, I think, in what the program turns out. So they allow me to run. The program's 10 months. There's a 3-day expeditionary element to the program in the Brecon Beacons, and we've just completed 2 of these back to back. And so you get guys and girls from all of our different services. So there's a real great networking opportunity as well. And this year we've put them in open boats and canoes in horrendous weather, by the way. We've put them in caves. They've abseiled. They've been on high ropes confidence courses. They've been through tunnels. They've sat in a classroom and gone through rapport-based exercises and conversations and discussions. They've gone deep in terms of like some of the therapeutic elements that's required. But everything is all about the nervous system, So for me, it's like we create some of these activities that are seriously challenging, and they're challenging because what it does is if you think about stress, actually think about like what I call the arousal continuum. So from, I don't know, being asleep, then being sleepy and drowsy, then being alert and calm, then being stressed, then being highly stressed, then being meta stressed, and for that I mean like panic. The environment that a lot of the people that I work with, they can be that their heart rates can be at a range of all of that arousal continuum there that I've just described.
Within seconds.
Yeah, literally within seconds. And also they can end up for long periods of time just getting dampened by cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, all these chemicals, which even when they're just sat there sometimes just thinking about some stuff, oh, what if this happened? Because they're always planning ahead, with some of the, highly complex young people we deal with. And you want to create the best environment possible for them to just, be okay and actually excel in the world. So they're always thinking ahead, around care plans and how can we do this how can we give them an opportunity which they wouldn't get in their normal world? How can we maximize that experience so that it's a rich opportunity of learning for them? All this stuff. And but sometimes they'll be sat there and then it may refire some trauma they've experienced, as part of the course of their daily work. It may send them, into a state of, feeling stressed or just highly stressed, just sat there. So over a very short period of time, when people kind of join this environment, if you don't kind of train them, prepare them, develop their learning, constantly going back to consistently go through this stuff, and so they're recognizing what these triggers and trips and this fall into this downward spiral of shadow behavior, where they don't even know where it's come from because it's at an unconscious level. If you're not being able to help them and prepare them, and there is no formal leadership and management programs, for instance, in the health and social care sector for this area of work. So we've created, some of these processes and whatnot, and it's about putting them through this kind of stimulus, and they will all do it differently, because everyone's different. We're all genetically wired different to the other person we're sat next to, because we've all been through different upbringings, different experiences of life, and all this kind of stuff. Been exposed to all manner of different stimulus, so they'll all respond or react differently. And some will be like, light blue touch paper and stand back, and they'll go off before your very eyes. Where others that maybe have dealt with this over an extended period of time may get to the balcony and regulate their emotions, get a plan together, and then go, right, you know what, I think I know what I'm going to do now, and then step back into the arena. But for me, it's all around, it's about, in the training environment, developing that healthy stress. Not so much that we're taking them into full-blown panic. We may take them up to the periphery of what they feel is comfortable, but it's all done deliberately with purpose. And it's about storing stuff in the hippocampus, storing stuff in the working memories that they can make associations to in the future, and then suddenly go, do you know what, I've got this. I'm all right with this. I've done this before. It's not as tough as this, for instance, or it's not as complex or difficult. This is what I did last time to get over this. I can deal with this. I can cope with it.
Which brings us right back to your upbringing in Lee. Absolutely. So, I mean, we've been running now over 55 minutes. You won't think that, but we have. And what I'd want to do is iron out this session, because I'd love to have you back on, Wayne, if that's possible.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Because I think we just started to hit where we are. And I think that we need to, to go deeper into what there is. I think there's a lot, we can go a lot further and see a lot more. So what I'd just like to do is, in order to do that, I'd like to just look at Lee again.
Yeah.
I'd like to bring you back, because the next time we come on, I'd like to explore more about Special Forces, rugby, and where you are, and then just see what we can do from there.
Yeah.
So if we can just look at that and see where we're going with that, I just think it sets us up beautifully for the next time. So if you can just explain to me what Lee was like growing up as a youngster, what's giving you this, what I would call resilience or reservoir of capacity.
Yeah.
What was it like, mate? What's giving you, you spoke a little bit about your father, you spoke a little bit about corporal punishment, you spoke a little bit about how you understood what it was like as a youth on the streets. And one thing I do want to say in this, just whilst I'm on that, is we're talking about dangers to women and young girls.
Yeah.
Now, let's be realistic about this. The people greatest at danger are young men, right?
Yeah.
They have been in the past, they still are now. And if you want to look, I've studied criminology, and if you want to look at stats, you will see that murder rates, any rate you want to look at in terms of violence, is like 78, 79% men.
Yeah.
So there's something in men that is that orientation, and it's not women who are taking the brunt of it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we shouldn't be dealing with the issues with women, but actually, are we saying that men aren't worth looking at? Because we do need to look at this, because this is where the problem is. Young men look at somebody wrong in a pub, and I'm bringing this to you because I know you're from Lee, and I know exactly what would have happened to you. Look, who are you looking at, mate? Now you've got choices. What do you do? Now, that's nothing to do with you've not done anything. You're just a normal guy in a pub, but a guy wants to prove himself. So he's turning around saying, what are you looking at, mate?
It's funny.
What are your choices?
Yeah, as you're talking, this really resonates for me because, I'm the father of 3 girls, and I wish I could change. Do I wish I could change this about myself? I possibly do, actually, because, the difficulty just going out for a meal, for instance. So, and this all comes back to, I think, growing up in Lee. So growing up in Lee was about surviving. When I say that out loud, it sounds kind of bizarre, really, because I had a very stable, upbringing. I come from a good family. My mum and dad were together. There was good family around us. I had a good friend base. You know, my mates. That's one of the incredible things, I think, that from leaving Lee when I was 19, you know, to run away and run away to sea, I guess, you know. I've got this thought in the back of my mind. I've always had it that first of all, my thought was I need to escape from Lee because, you know, I actually don't think I'll survive if I stay in Lee. But then the other thought was, and I've thought about this a lot recently, was it's if you know, like your unconscious motivators, you know, exist at a deep level, and it's really difficult to articulate them because they're so deep.
Yeah.
And when you get to the very, very bottom of the iceberg with me, and you go in terms of like sense of purpose, well, one of the things for me is to avoid going back to where I came from.
Yeah.
And I don't mean I'll visit it, you know, I've just been up there recently to see my mum and whatnot, but I almost think if I ended up back in Lee with my family, I think I would have failed.
I get what you're saying.
Because I broke out of there and I did look back, you know, for many years. I always thought, no, I'm gonna leave the service and I'll go back to Lee, and then there was a panic around and do what, you know, get in trouble, and then suddenly, you know, you're on that. The planet starts to tilt itself in a certain way, and you can't stop, and you're going down that spiral again, you know. So I think at my very core there was the avoid, you know, ever going back, because I didn't want my family being exposed to, you know, what I was exposed to when I was younger. But there's the understanding as I've grown older around, because I was exposed to that, because there was a lot of hardship and, you know, and it was tough, you became very resilient, you know, and I know I've got grit, you know, and if you explore grit for a minute, you know, courage, adaptability, resilience, and perseverance, and I know that's something that I even to this day I still practice. I was just talking about it last week, you know, when we were in the middle of the Brecon Beacons and with a group of people, and I was saying to them, if you split perseverance down to the atomic level, you know, you're talking about persistence and tenacity. Now one requires patience to keep putting one foot in front of the other, you know, because we did a bit of an iconic route. We did Penavan, you know, the upper Horseshoe Ridge. So it's, you know, all the two boys were up there on, I think it must have been like a pre-selection or something, you know, when we were there. So we drove straight through the middle of their group, you know, and so for my guys, all in care, you know, all like kind of team leaders and deputy managers and stuff, all in care, going, oh my goodness, you know, we're at the same place as these guys are training. That was a massive thing, you know. But I'm saying, like, it's about putting one step in front of the other, you know, and that requires patience to get round, you know, 6 hours, 7 hours worth of, you know, that mountain day. And then there's times when suddenly you're going, when you drop off, you think it's all done when you drop off Penavan into like what's called Windy Gap, into like the little saddle. And then I then go, oh, sorry, forgot to tell you, we're going up Cribben. And Cribben, as you know, Carlton, is quadtastic, you know, and then suddenly I'm then going, yeah, it is persistence, but do you know what? Right now, for you to even take that first step requires tenacity, requires impatience, requires you to be able to go, right, come on, I need to dial this back a little bit. Let's go. You know, we're doing this together. And all of that, you know, I never learned that from the Navy. I learned that from, you know, being a kid in Lee. You know,
it's interesting because I spoke with you'll know Sir Freddie Figures, right? So I was speaking with him because I knew him quite well when I was in Iraq, and also from Iraq, or was it Afghanistan? Can't remember. No, it was Iraq as well. Was General Lamb, former head of Special Forces Army, yes, or SAS. So both these guys, I put to them the question of national service, and it was quite interesting because both of these guys said, and I'm a kid of I'm like 10 years older than you, so I'm 10 years back. So the circumstances we were in, and like you, good parents, etc., etc., etc. A little bit different because we were the only people of colour in the areas, and there was no such thing as anti-racism. So there's a different angle to my upbringing
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So it was, there was some battling which one had to do just on that premise, but it's the same as yourself, because you've just got to live through the circumstance. But what both of these guys said is the problem now is this: in the previous national service, the reality was that the vast majority of people had steadfastness, had the ability to look after themselves. They knew when that national service was on that they would be, actually, to be fair, many of them going out to work at 14, 15, and that was their work life starting.
Yeah.
So they'd done something like that, and they were not in any way, shape, or means expectant of any special treatment.
Yeah.
Right. The problem now is, and it's not necessarily the kids' fault then, or I don't like calling them kids, I call them young adults or whatever's fault. It's that the system's telling them that they're children.
Yeah.
So because of that, it's easier to give up, because people turn around and say, oh, well, you tried your best, mate. That's it. Boom. And so I find that the steadfastness isn't there. Now, you could argue that's not a problem. Fair enough. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But I've travelled to probably 3/4 of the countries in the world, right? And you will have travelled a lot if you're in the Navy as well. And I've worked with most of the forces in those countries, or special forces, or special police units, or whatever you want to call them, in many of those places, and been to places or whatever else. I'll tell you that in many parts of the world, that steadfastness is still there.
Yeah.
So we are in a battle now against other states. It doesn't need to be negative battle.
Yeah.
But we're in a battle against them for capacity. These people have already created a capacity from just growing up. Did you see what I mean? Just making it through.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
And I don't know how we deal with that. I don't know how we clean that up.
I think it's difficult, because I think about, like, my daughters with this all the time, and I'm always thinking laterally. My wife's the same. We're always thinking laterally around. Let's give them a task that's going to pull on some attributes, and if they do it well or they don't do it well, I don't want to use the words they're going to get assessed by us, but they're going to get some feedback from us. That's the thing. Yeah. And my wife is a tough kid. She'll be quite forwards in giving critical feedback. I think it's one of the reasons I love her so much. But at times, with young children, you've got to temper that with a little bit of empathy, a little bit of the fact that you don't want them to grow up too fast as well, do you? You want them to enjoy.
No, it's a difficult one. Who wants to have a terrible childhood? You see these things. I'm going to say miners, because you're from a mining village. You see these things that turn around and say, oh, they've destroyed the mines, blah, blah, blah. But if you'd have actually spoken to a miner and said, do you want your lad to go down there? You'd say, no, mate, not at all. And die of emphysema when I'm 60.
Yeah.
So you can glorify negativity.
Yeah.
And let's be realistic. What we tended to do with children in the past was break them like horses and then rebuild them.
Yeah.
That also loses creativity. So what I'm trying to say is, I'm not saying it was all great in the past. I'm saying there obviously has to be a middle way that is probably the optimum. I just don't think we found it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with you.
I'm going to stop you there, my friend. I'm going to bring you back on. And we're going to go through quite a few things, because you've got things sitting around there which we haven't even touched on yet. So I want to give the viewers the listeners that opportunity to hear these special things. But so listen, that's it for today. Thank you very much, Wayne.
Thank you.
And we'll get back to you, mate. Don't be hiding away. Don't say, oh, we can't get back on the show. No, mate, we must have you back on, because we just touched on aspects of your work, both in the military and out with the military. Things like, example, just to give people a flavour, I know you're doing a lot on something that's close to my heart, which is, mental illness within that process.
Yeah. Because
for a lot of people, particularly in special forces or in other roles which require something that's beyond the norm, there's a mental price to pay for that. which is too often not recognised.
There is, and people don't like conversations about it neither that are involved in it.
Correct.
You know?
Correct.
That'll be a great starting point.
So that's what I want to hit on next time, so we can see, what, frankly, the state owes people for the actions that it asks them to carry out.
Yeah. Thank you,
my friends.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. All the best, and listeners, we'll see you again next week. Care.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for free.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.